So thank you for that introduction, although I will have to now reset the privacy settings.
It's nothing to be embarrassed about.
We're friends now.
You do have 342 friends.
Friends. And I just want to say also thank you to Christine for organizing this panel and for asking me to take part in it, and in advance to Mark for his comments. So what I want to present to you today are some reflections on the conflict over what I'm calling revolutionary liberty that took place in the Continental Navy during the years of the American Revolutionary War. And what I want to argue is that the Navy offers a new and I think useful window into what Carl Becker 100 years ago called the struggle for rule at home during the Revolution. Of course, there's been a lot of work on this question over the past 100 years. Just to name a few names, Howard Zinn, Jesse, of course, Woody Holton, Michael McDonnell, and most recently Ray Rayfield have worked on this. And what I think a study of the Revolutionary Navy can add is a couple of things. First, I think it's one of the few examples of, to put it bluntly, a large group of non-African Americans who are in sort of a highly authoritarian, socially hierarchical social system during the Revolution. And I think looking at this context and how they try to work through that social context in the revolutionary moment can help us contextualize the struggles of other unfree people and also of other maritime people in revolutionary America and the Atlantic. At the same time, I think the story of the Navy is surprising in the sense that the struggle for liberty from below here is not in any way a straightforward sort of simple story of top versus bottom, elite versus common people, but is actually a very complex negotiation in which the parties take on, I think, at times surprising positions and form surprising alliances along the sort of the hierarchical ladder. I'll come back to some of these sort of implications at the end, but I just wanted to lay them out there. Before I launch into analysis, I also want to give a little context for the Continental Navy, since it may not be the most familiar subject. The operative word here is small. The Continental Navy was small. It had very few vessels. The ships were small. It employed a relatively small number of maritime people. To give you a sense, the Navy fielded 21 frigates over the course of the entire war, no more than about 12 at any given time. And to give you a sense of the scale, the French and British navies had about 70 ships of the line, which are twice the size of frigates, and more than 70, each navy had more than 70 frigates sort of in service at any given time. So the Continental Navy is really like a drop in the bucket. Nonetheless, when Congress sat down to lay down rules for this new navy in October and November of 1775, incidentally quite early in the sort of development of American government, they took the job very seriously and tried to produce a compromise between what they took to be revolutionary liberty, revolutionary notions of sort of justice, and the traditional, highly authoritarian structure of naval life. The rules for the regulation of the Navy of the United Colonies, as the sort of regulations for the Navy were called, abolished the forced enlistment of seamen, in other words, impressment, and increased the pay and prize money to which seamen and inferior officers were entitled, in order, since you had prevented captains from forcibly enlisting men, to encourage men to join voluntarily. They also required, and this is, I think, as far as I know, this is quite novel in naval life, they required crewmen, including the captain, to sign essentially a contract, an agreement regulating the term of service, the rules of shipboard life, the length of the term of enlistment. And all of this, I think, adds up to a kind of contractual notion of what maritime, sort of entering into the Navy should be. You do it freely of your own will, you do it in response to incentives, and you do it regulated by laws and by rules. Once in the Navy, however, the Continental Congress essentially just borrowed the sort of structure of the British Navy wholesale. And so once you're in the Navy, rules, just like the British Articles of War, called for exemplary punishments, court-martials for virtually any kind of shipboard offense, desertion, stealing, shirking, fighting with other seamen, all of those things. The captain, in these are the rules for the regulation of the Navy, was, as in the British Navy, this sort of despot aboard ship, was to be followed in all things, The only relatively small concession to the sort of revolutionary vibe, since we're talking about Facebook, is that unlike in the British articles, which called for the death penalty for practically everything, including theft of property, and Peter Linebaugh has made quite a deal out of that. The American rules had prescribed the death penalty only for a few cases: mutiny, fleeing combat, and murder. So there's a kind of effort to split the difference between traditional understandings of what a navy is and kind of new notions of the liberty of the individual. Interestingly, though, the captains don't seem to have been willing to accept this compromise and these compromises to their authority. Several captains, such as John Nicholson and Seth Harding, tried to keep impressing seamen, and I'll come back to that in a second. Others resisted any limits on the power that they exercised aboard ship. And I think the most vivid example of this is Captain Hector McNeil of the Boston, who received a number of letters from the Continental Marine Committee telling him that he needed to cooperate a little bit more with his officers, and he wrote them back a remarkable letter, which I'll quote you in part. "God in nature has said," he wrote, "that one head is indispensably necessary on board of a ship. On that head, or principal person, every other must have such a measure of dependence as will urge them to obey his commands with cheerfulness. Otherwise," he explained, "the whole will run into anarchy and confusion." And I think this is quite a remarkable sort of self-description. If you replace the word ship with state in this passage, this is a statement of monarchic political economy, essentially, in which the king, all people are dependent on the king exercises all of the power, although it may be delegated, and failing that, you have chaos. So this, I think, is indicates already a kind of sort of movement backwards on the part of captains. And seamen and inferior officers, sort of ordinary sailors and inferior officers, were quick to see that there was a gap between where the Congress was and where the captains were, and they were equally quick to exploit it to advance their own conceptions, I think, of what the revolution should mean and what revolutionary liberty should be. This is particularly evident in seamen's resistance to impressment. At times, they would literally take up arms and oppose captains who were trying to impress them, but more often they would appeal to essentially civil officials, to either state government officials or to national government officials, and get their support to block the efforts to impress. So both Nicholson and Harding, as they tried to impress, found themselves coming up against a brick wall of state officials who refused to let them conduct their impressment. And why do I think we can legitimately call this revolutionary, or revolutionary sort of revolutionary behavior, in the sense that, not in the sense that the ends are revolutionary, not in the sense that there's anything novel about opposition to impressment. I mean, Jesse has shown us that opposition to impressment goes back as far as you can go. But the means that they're using to oppose it are new, in the sense that they're employing these new state governments, these newly empowered state governments, and they understand that the state governments are newly responsive to them. The governments which claim to represent the body of the people ideologically feel the need to respond to demands from below. And at the same time, they understand that the state governments now have a power which the colonial governments never had to